So welcome. I'm here in the UK. We are now looking for a new Prime Minister. So if there's any offers on this call, please do let yourself be known. You really don't need.
I have somebody. Wait, hold on. Will you guys accept a puppet as your?
Indy, honestly, you might be overqualified. That's the problem, you know.
But this is my guru here. So he's amazing human being. I mean, he's just amazing. I can't tell you. Everybody follows him. He's a big time. People just follow him.
All right, let's do it. Let's. You know.
Hello. You can pay me in samosa coins. Okay, I accept samosa coins.
We're on. Let's make it happen. Welcome you join us. Welcome Adelia. Welcome Alexander. Welcome Vamir. I think. Oh, there you are. Yes. Welcome Danilo. Thank you. Welcome.
I can just be your background music, so you could just keep. You could keep like saying what's up.
I was giving you the sacred space.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome, Jutta. Welcome, new joiners. You're very welcome to have your cameras on. So we've got some conversation going on today with our invited contributors. We also have the chat as well, and it would be great to know who's here. So you can go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. You can put your LinkedIn up if you'd like to encourage some people to connect with you and get to know you as well. We are in the spirit of all of our forums. Welcome, Luke. Then we are here to find ways to open our minds and to come together in the spirit of kindness and gentle inquiry. Welcome, Henry. Welcome, Abelsom. We've got the, what do we call it now? The transcript here live as well. So hopefully that helps with those who are joining us from all over the world. You're very welcome. We'll be finishing and ending on time. Nice to see you, Luke. Hope you're well. And but we will keep our after party going. So for those who want to carry on, and for those who maybe didn't get a chance to speak in the first session, then we will keep the session going, and we'll get some more views and insights on this. Some people consider our subject today to be contentious, but this session is not designed to be antagonistic. We are here for the opportunity to see what a fairer future does look like. And my goodness, I think we can all agree on this call that we need that. And we have searing hot levels of unfairness and inequality around the world. Thank you, Indy, for the backing track as well. That is wonderful. Indy interviewed me on his podcast recently and started with the flute. And it was always going to be a special time once we'd started in that manner. And I wasn't expecting it at all. Oh, no, you played the shell, didn't you?
Actually, it was a conch, actually.
Conch, yes. Do you have it?
It's actually, Richard, you got hypnotized. That's you weren't even conscious during that interview.
Yes. Beautiful. I'm just making some people co-hosts here who need the screen, everything like that. By all means, keep your microphones and cameras on. Obviously, if you have background noise, just keep an ear out for that, and so the team too. Welcome from MKAI. Welcome to those who've joined us before. Welcome to those who are new into this forum. We tend to get together once a month and explore some topics around the convergence of technology and the impact. I can tell you from everything we discussed today, this is going to be a thoroughly fascinating couple of hours on this subject. It may not be the direction that you think we go in, maybe it will. And the contributors that we've invited, who Jerry will be introducing as we go along, bring hugely different perspectives on this problem. We're still looking for any billionaires to come and give their perspective. They are more than tremendously welcome. But the perspectives we've got are on how do we navigate this world? What is our roles and responsibilities in the way that we look at those who amass great wealth and potential leverage of the systems that we've built in place that allow that to be the case? And if so, what are the problems with that? And what are the other options and ideas around this if we do find that there's better ways for us to have economic models in place? So welcome to those that are joining us as I speak now. I mentioned before, the chat here is for us to get to know each other. So do pop in your name, where you're from, put your LinkedIn or Twitter, and if that's your preferred domain, in there. Gratitude to Dead Reply UK, who provides some support to MKAI, which covers the costs of the platforms and things that we use to allow us to come together in this way. I'm joined by our colleague Vermeer today, who has warned me that he's out in the public sphere looking, is that a roll neck sweater? I'm a big fan of the roll necks now. I'm starting to come around to these big time.
It's a turtleneck indeed, and whatever you do with a turtleneck is like permissible. You know, you could go to the library, you could sleep in a turtleneck. It's just pure elegance. But I take after my brother. I wanted to say,
yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Richard.
It just raises the sophistication by about 5%, just instantly. It's very clever.
It's all illusions, you know. I was gonna say, I've never done a meditation in public in a turtleneck, so if you'd like me to go ahead, but I can't hear my own audio, so just let me know what's appropriate. Anyway, I mean, just to say, very happy to be here, engaged discourse, pleasure to see you all, and looking forward to opening my mind.
Very much so. This is the second time we've done this now, that we've just tried to just create the space. I promise those that have joined that we're not hippies, I promise. But we do like to just center the energy in this space so that we can have the best possible conversations that take us into the best possible places. Amir, we're at 6 past, so perhaps you could run to about 9-10 minutes past and just find some words that are going to place us in the right energy, you think, for what's going to come next.
Absolutely. So I think one thing to note here is that, you know, your psychology follows your physiology. So before I say anything, I just wanted to emphasize the breathing. You know, if we could put some attention together, I think, you know, you could do it privately, off camera, or publicly. And one thing we can do is just kind of sit upright. If you could just mute whenever you can, team, it'd be greatly appreciated. But we accept background noise as well. That's part of a meditative experience. So just sit up in your chair. Pretend a string is pulling your spine up so that your head is erect, straight, you're comfortable. The best thing in meditation is to be relaxed and alert. Relaxed and alert. You calm the water so you can see the mirror. All those nice analogies. So just feel your feet on the ground. Put your hands in a comfortable position. And then you want to breathe from your diaphragm as low as possible. Just take a deep breath in. I'm not going to guide. I'm just going to suggest. Just take a deep breath in. Just feel the air going in and out. It's cool when it comes in. It's warm when it comes out. It means your body is alive. Feel your body. Accept the way it is. Just take another breath. Kind of settling into yourself. And right now in this meeting, in the next breath, when you breathe in and out, just feel that you can accept whatever comes out of this. You might be preparing your speech. There's a bit of nervousness in there. There's a bit of preparation. There's a bit of wondering, which is part of any good experience. What's going to happen? Just be ready to receive and give. This is what this discourse is about. So on the next breath, just breathe in. If you want to keep your eyes closed, breathe in the input, and then breathe out so you can be calm and give your best effort. Calm, and then one more breath, and then we'll close. And breathe out. Feel that energy. It's beautiful. Glad to be with you all here. and I'll leave it off to the next fantastic members of the team. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Famir. And like you say, the background becomes part of it there. I find myself on the screen. So we'll be highlighting people as we go through today. This is very much an open forum. I was going to pop you back over there, Famir. If you've got something that you want to add, let me know. Let's make the space and the time that we need. We need to keep time, of course, so we'll be quite regimented on that as respect for everybody here that's today joining us. So let's jump in, and we're 1 minute early. Jerry, I've put Bettina on the screen here to start with. Bettina's going to set the scene for us. There's a million and one ways we could set this scene, but Bettina has stepped up to this for us. So Jerry, with you for an introduction, please.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Famir. Good morning, good afternoon, evening, and welcome panelists, members of MKAI's global family, MKAI champions and guests wherever you are. Friends, we think our production team have put together another fascinating, insightful and impactful event for you, and we really hope you enjoy it. We have what we believe to be a truly incredible lineup of distinguished panelists for you, this time from India, the United Kingdom, Sweden, the United States of America and Switzerland, all of whom feature on the MKAI global list of amazing people. So, first of all, I'm honoured and delighted to invite you to know our truly astounding first guest, who joins us today from Munich, Bavaria, Germany, who will set the scene for us. An innovation philosopher, storyteller, and regeneration proponent, she's been a visionary thinker and doer in the field of innovation for over 30 years. Whether running leadership seminars and workshops or speaking at conferences, whether coaching, mentoring, or teaching MBAs and executives, she brings her contagious positive energy to bear to inspire and open minds. Her credibility arises from an approach that combines her deep insights with the latest insights from scientific and social science research, and her passion for and knowledge of her work make her fun and engaging to work and talk with. She's an advisory board member for sustainability and innovation of J, an advisory board member of the Global Innovation Institute, an academic advisor and practitioner for 6 Eyes of Innovation, an international visiting professor at Karnavati University, forgive me them, and a visiting professor at Middlesex University. Please welcome Dr. Bettina von Stam.
Thank you very much, Jerry. And yes.
Now you see why I let Jerry do the intros, right?
That's sort of was a very, very long one. Very, very well. Thank you very much. Anyway, and I'm truly delighted to be here. And as I know, I can talk for forever and a day. I have made an effort to try to write my speech that I know I'm fairly on time with what I'm doing. So the worship of billionaires is our worst religion. What does the title of today's session trigger in you? Agreement, disagreement, Schadenfreude? The wonderful German word for gloating about someone else's misfortune, like finally it's payback time. It would be quite an understandable reaction, given that according to the World Inequality Report, the top 0.01 richest individuals, which is 520,000 out of the 8 billion on Earth, hold about 11% of the world's wealth. The top 10% earn over 52% of global income, sharing even more, 76% of global wealth between them. In contrast, the bottom 50% of the population hold only 2% of global wealth. Jeffrey Sachs, considered to be one of the world's leading experts on economic development and the fight against poverty, stated that the cost to end poverty would be 175 billion per year for 20 years. So that's 3.5 trillion in total. Coming back to the global wealth, it's about 461 trillion, 352 are owned by the top 10%, meaning that 1% of their wealth should sort out world poverty. But even if we could get the top 10% to give up 1% of their wealth, while that might sort out world poverty, I'm not quite sure it would address the fact that we seem to worship money. which is why, rather than addressing this statement head on, I'd like to start with a somewhat different perspective, one that focuses on why we measure, on how we measure the progress of humanity. So how do we do it? Well, we are aiming to answer that question. We are actually not really looking at progress, but we are using something else as proxy, growth. I'm sure we are all familiar with every country's obsession with GDP, the gross domestic product, that's calculated by considering personal consumption expenditure, business investment, government spending, and net export and goods of goods and services. The concept of GDP goes back to the end of the 18th century. It was developed further by an American economist in 1934, and was adopted as main measure of a country's economy well-being at the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944. As ever, to understand the concept, timing and location are critical and too often ignored or forgotten. Where was the world at in 1944? Much of it was in ruins, well, at least in the developed world, and even more specifically Europe. A prime concern at the time was to create mechanisms on how to engage and cooperate after the end of the World War II, and to be able to measure improvements and progress of countries. It was accepted, seemingly without questioning, that growth was what governments around the globe should be focused on. Yet, if we look at the American Declaration of Independence, the role of government is not to facilitate growth, but, to quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, amongst these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." This duty of government is occasionally pointed out, for example, by Robert F. Kennedy, who said back in 1968, GDP is not measuring that which makes life worthwhile. The European Parliament, which stated in 2007 that GDP does not properly account for social and environmental costs and benefits. It is also difficult to achieve sustainable decision-making, aiming at sustainable progress and well-being if welfare is being considered from a purely financial point of view only. Though other than the small state of Bhutan, I'm not aware of any country that has really translated such intents or realization into reality. As is often said, what gets measured gets done. And so the vast majority of us are busy focusing on making money, earning our livings, securing our future. The focus on money seems to be so deeply ingrained in us that very few of us question it. Yet, what makes us happy? Again and again, research identifies the following: meaningful relationships with others, maintaining a pleasant hobby or work environment, giving back to the community or those in need. To go a step further, if we ask people on their deathbed about their greatest regrets, as Australian author and songwriter Bronnie Ware has done about a decade ago, none of them mentioned making more money, but here is what they said most frequently. "I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings. I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. I wish that I had let myself be happier." While I still hear some of you argue that material goods can provide happiness, research indicates that this is not the case. The wealthiest people are not necessarily the happiest, and to feel satisfaction and joy in life, wealth is not required. However, of course, I am aware that an estimated 700 million people, or approximately 9% of global population, are living in extreme poverty. That is, they are living less on $1.90 a day. Life without any financial resources is clearly misery. Just as an aside, if those 1 in 10 people living in poverty wanted to buy a cup of coffee in Switzerland, they have to save up for more than 3 days, as it is quite difficult to find a cup of coffee that's less than $6. So, where is the sweet spot? Research indicates that people are most happy after their necessities are met. Those of you familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs will know that the necessities include the 2 lower levels of the hierarchy: physiological needs, food, water, warmth, rest, and safety needs, being free from fear. I'm afraid that after that, it's more about looking on the inside for greater happiness. Why do I say that? If we are looking at the aspects of happy people, Again, sort of just to state the research findings, they cultivate strong long-term relationships. They prefer time and having fun to having money or more money. They notice and are grateful for the good things in life. They are kind and like to contribute, and they don't worry too much about past and future. And again, all of this is research-based. So after a certain level of wealth, it is more about attitude and how we think than what we have. Obtaining any and all of the above lies in our hands. It just depends on what we believe our purpose and the aim of life to be. To come back to the religion of billionaires, I believe that the worship of money and thus billionaires comes from a wider societal focus on, or rather obsession with money, that was enshrined by choosing GDP as key measures of a country's well-being. If government wanted to take their responsibility for ensuring people's happiness seriously, different, more appropriate indicators and measures should be identified. Perhaps measures could be about overall levels of awareness and education, true equality for all, or how about contributions to preserving the system that sustains us all, planet Earth. Today, we certainly have all the data and technology to make such assessments possible. Without a healthy planet that supports and sustains us, all the money in the world will not make a difference. If indeed we had measures focused on happiness, what religion would we follow then?
Thank you so much. Bettina, that was beautifully started, and I love the themes that you're bringing through there. And it's the biggest one, really, you know, that ultimately we're talking about happiness here, aren't we? Yes, there's fairness, inequality, and so on, but what we're looking for is this happiness, you know, rooting through everything that we do, and that certainly isn't coming in the forms that we're creating at the moment. So I'm going to bring our next speaker onto the screen. There will be plenty of time for us all to chat. Please join me in just thanking Bettina in the chat there for putting together that opening statement for us. Jerry, I brought Carsten on the screen, so I'll just ask you to hop in and give an intro to Carsten, and then we'll dig into some of these details, if that's okay with you. And I'll unmute you.
That's going to help. Thank you, Richard. Enormously proud now to introduce our next distinguished panelist. Joining us from London, he's Reader, Associate Professor in Digital Innovation at the London School of Economics and Political Science. He's more than 30 years of experience as a scholar and academic consultant, researching the digital transformation of organizations and their collaborative ecosystems. Since 2008, he's focused on digital platforms and infrastructures, in particular, most recently, rights-based infrastructures based on blockchain and other emerging distributed ledger technologies. It's a huge honor and privilege to welcome Dr. Carsten Sorensen.
Carsten, you're very, very welcome indeed. Let's pick up where Bettina was leaving us, but let's also just look at the perspective here, that the normal thinking here is that this is positive, isn't it? That the attrition of wealth and accumulation of wealth is relative to the size of the problem that you're solving, the number of people that you're helping, the amount of innovation that's being created by you or your company, and and what's the problem with that, and doesn't it create the model of the free world that we're all so grateful for? So there's some truth in that, I guess, isn't there, Carsten?
Well, I think there's a couple of issues we probably need to untangle here. So like the first issue always in research is, whenever you look at something, is there the change a difference in kind or just a difference in degree? And so I would argue that, of course, that some of these issues I couldn't agree more with Bettina's introduction. I thought it was beautiful, and I would sign any of this. In theory, the challenge is how to do that in practice, but I completely agree. And one of the biggest problems we have, I can speak as a non-economist, although I'm tainted by my colleagues, is exactly that. It's really hard to measure. Even the information society, even the service society is really hard to measure, because economists tend to like things that have a clear input and output function. So you can measure how much value was there added by making this iron ore into a car. And so the problem we have is, what is the global value of the PDF standard? And so the problem is, I completely rightly agree with your first half of the quote. Only what gets measured gets done or gets managed. So the problem we have is the second half of that quote is often left out, that says, but only if it makes sense to measure it. And you can actually sensibly argue that the measure of GDP is senseless as a measurement in the first instant, even if you believe in it as a construct. But what I wanted to point out is two main things that I'll do relatively short. The first one is that there's what we tend to emphasize when we want something is to have individual access to something, to an infrastructure. But when we had to pay for it, we want other people to pay for it. So billionaires are no different than any other people. So the point is here that if they have spent a lifetime benefiting from an extremely active public investment in infrastructure and knowledge systems that enable them to surf on top of that and make Facebook out of it and reap the benefits of that, once the society comes back, I'm paraphrasing work by Mariana Mazzucato, an economist from University College London, who's written insightful on this, is saying, although I'm an Apple fanboy, Apple clearly benefited hugely from billions of investments from public purse in the innovation system in America and across the globe. So when they wanted to do the iPhone, they basically stuck together some components with some very intelligently made glue and tweaked things. And so the point is here that her argument is that these innovation infrastructures, there should be some kickback. That in that sense, the ventureful state, the state is a venture capitalist in this system, and there should be something coming back to them. You can't imagine a venture capitalist that wouldn't want a return on their investment in a startup. So this is one thing I wanted to point out, that really we need to look differently at it. And the reason why we need to look differently at it is because of the second point I want to make, is that new digital technologies, they establish a different power relationship between labor and capital. And although this is not my area of expertise, I just claim this because others have claimed it ad infinitum, that the point is here that, of course, even though we have a labor crisis in the UK now, because we have stopped the inflow of free inflow of labor, and we therefore get a higher wage pressure because there are fewer people for the jobs, and some people have decided that life in a tube and 8 hours a day as a barista is not worth living for less than the minimum wage. Well, this is the problem of the system. It doesn't know how to incentivize them. But in the grand scheme of things, we have a long trend development to emphasizing capital over labor. And David Graeber's book on bullshit work, a theory, described this brilliantly. And the point is here that because this is the case, things like AI is just going to exacerbate that wildly. But in a very concrete sense, what we have is a system with digital technologies, and in particular the digital platforms, that for the successful ones allow somebody to set up shop where the flywheel of network effects. So the more people go on a certain platform, the more people that are attracted to that platform. That means a relatively low capital investment can lead to a command of a whole market and skewing that market. And that means the rent extraction from that monopoly or duopoly create immense wealth because the scaling of it. So as I would say, I work for Uber because I download the app, I put in my credit card details, I book the Uber. When I've driven the Uber, I decide to tip the driver and pay a little bit extra because I used to have a job where I relied on tips. And then I rate the driver who also rates me. What is Uber doing? They're having away days about performance measures, and then they're writing some code. And so the point is here, we are all working for Mark Zuckerberg. We're all working for Google. We're all working for these platforms, but we are not paid. And we do so because there's a benefit to it. But that network effects means that we have challenges to what is work and how should it be remunerated? And so again, I want to take the anthropological perspective, although I'm not an anthropologist, because of course, David Graeber polemically attacked this whole system and says, we are emphasizing those who can produce the capital to build a bridge. And what we are not doing, we are not rewarding those, we are not rewarding the bridge building as a process of care for those who need to cross the river. So we are disassociating, and of course, it's the same with birth. So I can say, we gave birth. Well, we meant I was asleep on the sofa and my wife spent 38 hours giving birth. So giving birth is the production of a baby. Giving birth is not a long and laborious process of giving birth and bringing up a child to adulthood. And so the problem is we forget about the process in this. So that brings me to the last point I want to make, which is also slightly polemic, and it relates to the automation angle. So what is the future going to bring us? Because James Sussman is sort of carrying on David Graeber's work also as an anthropologist. And his argument in his book, Work, What We Spend, a book on what we spend our time on, I think it's a subtitle, it's basically called Work, the book. And where he argues using the African weaver bird as an example, he says, maybe work is just a way of the universe to produce entropy. So the argument is that the African weaver bird, it will weave a nest for the eggs and the young chicks. But once they're out of the nest, if there is plenty of food, the weaver bird, the male weaver bird, will unweave and make it all into pieces of grass. And the point is there, you ask, why does it do that? Because it has more energy. So the way to think about this is that, of course, the economists in the 30s that thought we were going to have, like, I think it was Keynes that thought we were going to have 4-hour working days or 20-hour working weeks, which we didn't. So the way James Sussman will explain this is simply paraphrased. By the time we managed to automate work so it became more effective, we just invented PowerPoint and email to burn up all the extra effort we had. So we keep on inventing work for ourselves. And in all of that, you could say, well, the more we invent all of this work and the more the real value creation is automated, the more of the spillover effects of that in terms of rent will go to the very few who control the production assets. So this is getting a little bit Marxist towards the end, but I think the key thing here is we have a bind, because economically we could say, well, we can solve the problem by taxing the rich by 1 or 2%. But the problem is that universal basic income in the current economic system will fuel inflation so vastly that it is not possible of doing. And so we don't know what to do, but one of the ways of thinking about it is the relationship between the innovation system and the underlying infrastructures that creates the value, by saying, well, there's a reason why the iPhone is not African. I'm sorry, Africa, but there's a reason why. And the reason why there is an incredibly advanced knowledge innovation system in America and a lot of venture capital. And that system is very effective, and also very effective in creating billionaires. That's it. Out and over for me.
Yeah. We pin it all on Jobs and a couple of his cronies. I mean,
exactly.
And then we see Google auto-completing our sentences and think, oh, thank you so much, Google, for saving me time on this email. It's Google's fault there's so many bloody emails in the first place. What am I thanking them for? Catching you up, Carsten, I was working with a colleague, and he was a big Richard Branson fan. I said, what do you like so much about Branson? He said, well, it's simple. He came from nothing like me. And I said, are you sure? I said, because he went to Stowe School and got a Bentley for his 18th birthday. And Stowe is £42,000 a year. So I'm not sure he had the same start as you. Tina, I want to bring you back in, and Vermeer, I know will probably want to comment on this. But the question here is well, I guess to point out a little bit more you're saying about the lack of innovation. And if we take, like, it's just an opinion, this, but if we take Facebook's application, we know it's getting usurped to some degree by TikTok. And you could think, well, okay, that's because everything has its time. There's new players coming up who've got a better proposition. But then let's not forget that TikTok is probably vastly funded by the Chinese government. So could TikTok have come from Finland or Kenya or the UK or somewhere else? Possibly not, because Facebook may or may not, be an innovative platform. We can argue about that. But what they are very good at is trying to shut down those that could usurp what they have by trying to be the default platform. We've seen that across Android and Google and all those things. By going into Africa and saying, hey, here's free internet, but you have to do it through Facebook. So they put a lot of effort into trying to protect what they have. Would you say, Carsten, Bettina, instead of actually really innovating?
Do you want to go first, Tina?
Yeah. I mean, I just sort of. So, are you saying that innovation is not really happening because the established players try to protect what they have, I mean, that was ever thus. I think it is. I think with these platforms, I mean, in a way, one platform is enough to serve the entire planet, in principle. And I think that's one of the challenges. Whereas before you had the car manufacturer in this country and another one in that country, because it was all more the globalization hadn't happened to the same degree, the connection between the different things. So there was more, in a way, there was more room to innovate locally, to grow locally before it could be smashed, and then become a player in the world. Whereas I think now with the spotlight on everything, or the possibility to see everything, to find everything, to be connected to everything, it is much easier to find things when they are still very small and rip them out if need be, or buy them,
Yes.
or whatever it might be. Because also, to say on the other side, the people who are developing these new things, very often they are motivated by making a quick buck rather than solving a problem, or really a passion for
or trying to get bought by a tech company, because that's the
the
easiest way to make money, right?
Well, I think it's a bit of both. So I would say, so of course, this is what I think the economists have called the Silicon Valley kill zones. So if you are getting too close to the sphere of interest from the big flat platforms, then you have a choice. It's really Hobson's choice. But here you have two versions. The one is that you basically get bought by it. And possibly get closed down, as I know a couple of people who have their company was just closed down by the big platform. The other option you have is being completely outcompeted by them. So at the end of the day, the result is more or less the same, except you end up with a bit of money in the purse in one of them. So I would say that competition in the digital age is really complex, because on the one hand, like a very famous book is Larry Lessig, or Lawrence Lessig's book, The Future of Ideas, from 2000 or 2001, where Lessig argued that if you distinguish between content, application, and infrastructure, so you have TV programs, you have TV sets, and you have the networks, the public networks that distribute the TV programs, then he saw a future that was very dystopian, where the private companies would lock down at each of the levels. They would control the production of ideas, and he says that means there will be no ideas. So that was his message. He ended up being, and this is typical digital, he ended up being completely right and completely wrong at the same time, because what happened was that in terms of innovation, these digital platforms that are accessed through our smartphones, they ended up completely cornering the market. There is only two operating systems worth speaking. If anybody has a Nokia, a Symbian operating system, or a Windows operating system on their phone, you are old school. So they cornered the market, but that didn't lead to the lack of innovation. It led to a huge explosion in innovation on millions and millions of smartphones. The problem is, however, all these platforms are controlled by one entity. So of course, these entities, so what typically happens is somebody comes up with a brilliant idea for the phone, and the platform owners look at this and say, that's an excellent idea to put in our operating system, and that person is then out of business. And so the problem we have is there's massive innovation, but there's also hugely centralized control. So the whole idea of Web3 and all of that, the idea is to try and make cooperatives where you have a chance of ganging up together to beat this monopoly. But I would also, as a final point here, is one of the reasons why this is interesting in terms of like differences in kind rather than differences in degree, because you could say from a high level, these are just digital robber barons. There is no difference, and we need to split them up like the oil companies or the railway companies. These have just amassed a control of the market. So this is an insufficient, this is a market failure. So we just need to split them up. But because of the unique characteristics of digital technologies, so if we split up Google in 7 mini Googles, then we end up whichever part of Google that gets DeepMind just up the road here, they might end up winning within 3 years, because they're not hampered by all the old Google. They can just go straight to the interesting stuff. And one of the key things in the difference in kind is, as I would highly recommend reading Shoshana Zuboff's Zuboff's book from 2019, which is called Surveillance Capitalism, in the age of surveillance capitalism. Yeah, I can see it there in the back. Exactly. And so the point is there, what it argued is, if you want to understand why these digital platforms and she points out in particular Google and Facebook or Meta, why have they been allowed to go along and do this and harvest our private data for so long without us minding it really largely? And the reason for that is, she says, because the phenomena is so unknown to us that we've been blind. So she equates it to authoritarianism, authoritarian societies like the Hitler's Third Reich and Stalin's communist state with millions of people being shot in the neck. And the point is here, because we have not seen it before, in the same way as Stalin was on the cover of Life magazine 10 times, journalists visited the schools and the prisons and thought, what a fantastic society of equality. And what they didn't see was the millions of people in the gulags or basically shot. And so the point is here, we have not fully seen the consequences. So one of the ways of understanding this is we have a bunch of digital rubber barons now. They are only that because they are in this intermediate period between not existing, because these technologies didn't exist 15, 20 years ago. But in the future, these will be utility companies that will be highly regulated and allow to become infrastructures on top of which innovation can happen. And that we have not seen, and they'll be taxed properly. So we don't know what's going to happen. But the point is, right now we have a system where if you want to bump off Google, well, Facebook managed almost to bump off Google to some extent, but it gets more and more difficult because they have built up infrastructures of tentacles on the internet that are very difficult to unpick from the basic operations of the internet. And so I think they have established utility infrastructures that we can't do without.
Yes. Vermeer, do you want to add a point at this point? No pressure, but just a
point at this point.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I apologize. The lighting seems pretty dramatic, so I can't do anything about it. But
you still look exceedingly handsome, Vermeer, so I wouldn't worry about it. All right. Just
coming from Richard Foster's lecture, my God, you know, the romance is real, my friends. I mean, I was trying to think of how to organize my thoughts, listening to these extremely eloquent speakers. So,
well, what about this whole starting in a garage thing, Vermeer? I mean, what do you buy into that?
I was gonna say, I was thinking of all things of like a lotus flower, because many of you might know, but it's like a lotus flower erupts from the mud and it stays fragrant. It stays in the dirt, you know, but it's blossoming in a tough scenario. The reason why I bring up this analogy is because what was said earlier about, you know, how do we react? What would our new religion look like if the Maslow's hierarchy of needs was fulfilled, or if it was directed in a certain way? And it seems clear to me that a lot of people enter this conundrum mentally. They feel that, you know, well, if you can't beat them, join them. You know, if I submit and I become a peaceful person who's not money grubbing or resource grubbing, what's going to happen? It's just another shark that's going to come in, right? So I better get as many resources as I can, and then I'll do good in the future. We all know where that leads. You know, you kind of don't know what power feels like. Richard and I were talking about this. You don't know what it feels like till you have it, and you don't abuse it till you have it, because you can't. So this is just, like we said, kind of human behavior. But the reason why I bring this up is because slowly it seems that pointing the arrow, having the new compass, is better long-term. If you think of a wise man, he's always thinking of things, as I mentioned before with Richard, he's always thinking of things in the long term, right? So it seems to me like mathematically over time, if you're a truly compassionate person, if you're someone that actually understands the situation and cares about all people, this small group are human beings. These billionaires, if we know that they're going in the wrong direction, they're running towards things that will not satisfy them. And maybe we have this seemingly clairvoyant awareness of this, and we actually see that they're going to cause suffering to themselves, and with this corrupted power, maybe, for mistakes, going to cause undue suffering upon others. So why I bring up the lotus flower is it seems clear that if you can become the guiding light, it doesn't put you on the side. It doesn't put you in the corner. People will follow you as a leader. They will see that there's a better way. You might become a billionaire yourself anyway, but incorruptible. This seems to be the best possible outcome of someone who is abundant, but not abusive. So I'm kind of articulating in a way that we need to transcend these evolutionary principles, but we cannot resist the fact, or we have to accept the fact that they exist. Many people are misguided. We're not better than other people for knowing things. And it seems like if you know that having this higher awareness of things is important, then all you can do is help guide other people. Just reading a message that came in, how can you accumulate without exploitation? Impossible. I mean, I want to pause there. I'd love to
we'll
touch
pick that
on
up,
that, but I wanted to,
yeah, we can get your thoughts on
yeah.
that.
I hope it was at least a little clear what I'm trying to get.
We're going to, John Thor's on the screen and I'm very excited about that. So I don't want to, Vivi, thank you for that. And we're going to touch on this. Carsten's already set the scene here and others are going to lean into this like visually later on, is that, we are starting to get the tools to do that. A very quick story about MKAI. I mean, this is how we're trying to build. We're building a diverse collective to identify AI risks. I talked about this to a large consultancy and their immediate reaction was, oh, that's something we might like to acquire. Okay. I said, thank you for that. Well, maybe what they haven't realized is that when they come to acquire this in 2 to 3 years from now, it's going to be completely contained within a DAO, which means for sure you can rip it to shreds and start again with the smart contracts. But otherwise, it's done. Maybe you can own it, but you can't change it. You can't tighten the screw on it. You can't look at the cost of all these people that were compensating and go, that's a bit expensive, isn't it? let's change that. And I don't know if they've quite seen that the acquisitions in the future, they're going to come, with some rigidity around fairness that maybe they haven't anticipated yet. John Thor Sigurðsson is back for the 3rd time, which makes him our most popular speaker ever in the history of MKAI.
I get that in writing.
I'll send you a plaque, John, passed down from the heavens itself. Jerry, please introduce John Thor.
So for those of you who don't already know John Thor, but I think most of you do, he joins us from Greater Stockholm, Sweden, and is a self-proclaimed corporate punk and creative nerd. He's also the co-founder of Elevate. His career has spanned multiple industries and countries, but regardless of where he is, he's always looking for opportunities to grow and to help others do the same. He's a passionate and inspirational leader, dedicated to inspiring others to ask better questions in order to build a better, more ethical and sustainable future. Once again, please welcome John Thor Sigurðsson.
Welcome.
Well, so happy to be here. And first of all, I just want to start out by calling out that, Carsten, the fact that towards the end of your segment, you mentioned that it was getting a bit Marxist. I feel like that's the perfect segue over to me, because when I did my TED talk, TED actually had to remove several very negative comments calling me a communist, all in caps lock, which wasn't really a surprise. I feel like I have a general idea of the type of person that was on the other end of that. But there's another reason why I wanted to start by calling that out, and that's because, the idea here is not just saying billionaires have a lot of wealth, we don't, that's wrong. I think we're probably all on the same page here. This misdistribution of wealth isn't an ethical thing. It is very much the failing of a system. But in my TED talk, I touched upon the idea of a world where this is no longer a problem, and this world is Star Trek. And this might be a little bit of a left turn from essays and books by economists and anthropologists, but if you bear with me, I just want to mention, because in one of the Star Trek films, there was a scene where they travel back in time to our time, and someone asks Jean-Luc Picard, why does the crew of the Enterprise not have any money? Why does no one have any currency? And Jean-Luc Picard's response is, well, from the time where we are, so that was the 23rd century at that time, the the pursuit of wealth is no longer a focal point for humanity, but rather the betterment of ourselves and others. And now I saw this film as a kid, maybe pre-teen. I can't quite remember the exact year, but I remember that moment thinking, this is what the future will look like. This is where we're headed. And if you look at the news, if you look at the state of the world, it's kind of hard to believe we're heading there. But I want to call out that one of the big moments in human history in the Star Trek universe between now and then is the unification of Ireland. And that conversation is going on right now. So there is a step in that direction. Unfortunately, there's also nuclear war on that timeline. So got to take the good with the bad. But in reality, we're talking about how should we initiate an epiphany for a fairer future, I believe was the subtitle of today's event. And this is something I touched upon in both the TED Talk as well as, I believe, my first presentation at MKAI, which at that time was a physical event. And I talked about the fact that we have entities in the world like the United Nations that are dedicated to their tenets of human rights. But the challenge comes in the fact that following up on these tenets and following up on adhering to them has proven a lot more cumbersome. We've seen companies like Nestle get repeated advice and requests and letters from the UN saying you have to get rid of slavery in your supply chain. And every time they get a deadline, they miss. And what happens? They get a new deadline. And when I was thinking about this topic, I started thinking about this term, the worship of billionaires. So I started thinking, well, let's look back in history. What has happened to leaders that have been deified, that have been viewed as gods, as more than the rest of us? And I don't know about you, but the first type of leader that came to mind when that comes up is pharaohs in ancient Egypt, who were viewed as gods or demigods. And I thought, what ended the pharaohs? And well, it was the Romans, which had their own god leader at the top. And what ended the emperors? Well, it was a Germanic king. And what started ending the kings? Well, we still have some. Obviously, UK has recently crowned a new one. But if we look at a famous example of getting rid of kings, the French Revolution, I've got to say, all of these solutions seem especially violent. And if we look at the way that we are taught about a lot of revolutionary things in more recent times, things like the civil rights movement, we are presented with peaceful protest. We are shown Martin Luther King walking with the people and just generally being a nice guy with a dream. We're not taught about the scuffles. We're not taught about the violence. We're not taught about the harsher elements of it. And when you hear most, I guess, mainstream media and education talking about things like the Black Panthers, we don't hear about the breakfast clubs. We hear about terrorism. We hear about kidnappings. We hear about gang violence. And this is a carefully constructed narrative. And the reason I say this especially is a couple of years ago, a man named Douglas Rushkoff wrote a couple of articles about the survival instinct of billionaires. And he's written a follow-up of that this year. And there's been a few video interviews. And it is incredibly interesting to hear him tell the story of when he was booked to do what he thought was a keynote speech or seminar. And he shows up and a couple of, in his words, tech bros in Patagonia fleeces show up in a golf cart to ask him how to survive the inevitability of the lower classes coming for their heads. And this is a type of person that's rushing to buy a seat in Peter Thiel's helicopter to take them to New Zealand when America erupts. This is the type of person buying a citizenship in New Zealand in order to build an underground bunker. This is the type of person that thinks, I have enough money to solve poverty, but what if I spend it to flee the poor when they come for me? It is an incredibly interesting dilemma because to me, it paints exactly what both Carsten and Bettina you were talking about. We have a system that is effectively a house of cards where any idea of fixing the foundation means everything on top of it crumbles. And Carsten, you touched upon universal basic income. This is something I talked about in that TED Talk as well, that the risk there is we have a system where bailing out companies isn't a risk to inflation, but helping the lower 99% is a risk to inflation. And if there was ever a reason for us to say this system's broken, that has to be it. If we just look at statistics from Oxfam, they released a report on inequality where they pointed out that not only has the recent pandemic set gender parity back, but it has caused the wealth distribution to become even more unequal. We've seen huge gains from billionaires, and they've pointed out so many just incredible things in terms of, I believe it was the top 10 men, if they were to lose 99.999% of their wealth, they would still be richer than 99% of people on the planet. And I remember, again, kind of going back to my childhood, but I promise this isn't Star Trek again. I remember someone mentioning, I can't remember if it was someone like Michael Jordan or some really rich athlete, and someone said the phrase, they have accumulated more money than they will ever be able to spend. And as a kid, I thought, so they'll die rich? That's depressing. And for years, I thought back to this thought and wondered, why did I find it depressing to die rich? And I don't know if that was my foundation at the time, but now I look back and I think, at least now I feel that way, because if we have billionaires, it means that we have people who have accumulated so much wealth at the expense of others that they have to be stopped. And I've seen so many people rush to billionaires' defense, so many people thinking, oh, but I need to have an opportunity to be filthy rich. And the thing is, there's such a big gap between being rich and being a billionaire. You know, our issue is not with people making, you know, $150,000 a year, or even $500,000 or $1 million a year. My issue personally is with the people that are, according to The Guardian, their companies should have a seat in the UN because they're such big political entities. My issue is with people finding ways to not pay taxes and help the poorest people in their countries. My issue is with companies like Amazon and Walmart making record profits and yet counting on food stamps and welfare for their employees for them to make barely a livable wage. And I think in order to get an epiphany going, I think we need to lean into not the violence that I mentioned, but the reality that if we don't change anything, that is an inevitability. If we do not change something, the violence will come, and sadly, it'll impact the 99% in the short term way more than the 1%.
Can I just add, very good, thank you. I just add a little comment to that. So the point is, unfortunately, we would have to, and there's one of the comments on that just popped up. I think we have to democratize the idea of redistribution. So, and this is of course the whole idea of why did the vision of a hunter-gatherer working day of 3 hours or 2 hours, why didn't it get fulfilled? Well, so the point is there, my dad grew up in a farm where there was 8 kids and 2 adults, and they were all fed by 3 pigs and 4 cows and a horse instead of a tractor and some bees. And the point is that worked because they didn't have to go on stag nights to Torremolinos. They didn't have to buy a new car every second year. And so the point is here, I think we need to look inwards. And so if you, of course, Kurt Vonnegut's book, Play a Piano, which draw out a future of Google and Facebook giving us fantastic services, and we don't have to worry about the material aspects of life. And so the point is here that the challenge is for us to try and redirect human activity, and indeed to do so by being more conscious. And so that what we get is plentiful, because there is plenty, but what we also are mindful of, what is the cost of some of the things we want. And I think exactly as I said in the comment, everybody on this call is rich. And so the point is here, we are, as any prophet or any guru that wants to talk to you about reaching enlightenment, they would say start with yourself. And so the point is there, we have to start with ourselves and say, how are we surrounding ourselves? And I have in my back here my museum of all the gadgets I bought over the years, or some of them at least. And the point is here, like, none of the iPhones I have made me more happy. But the problem is we now have unique opportunities to get service-based relationships and do all sorts of things that can bring us together. And what we just need to make sure is that we don't do this without including those who cannot participate now. And so I think it's in effect, I would argue, what Harari alluded to in his 21st Century book, where he basically argues that nuclear proliferation and the environmental crisis and digital technologies are the three main threats to humanity. And two of them are really only bad, whereas the digital technologies are both bad and good. And that makes them much, much more dangerous, because we will always see people with a political interest and an economic interest in making the upside known and not the downside.
Right, beautifully said. I wanted to just jump in on that last point on, you know, I realized in my personal life, in my young life, you know, that, you know, no man is an island. I think it was Arnold Schwarzenegger, whether you're a fan of him or not, he was saying that, you know, he was never a self-made man. He thinks it's an illusion. And I don't think that this is a harsh criticism. I think it's actually true. You know, when he first came to America, he lived at the gym. Those people brought him up. They gave him blankets. They gave him food. They gave him things, right? And they empowered him and they made connections. And I can definitely tell you, everybody on this call, everybody off this call has had some olive branch, some opportunity. And so when we talk about how everybody on this call is rich, I often hear some people say, what about this situation, the homeless man on the street, compare? And it's like, actually, you know, it's funny. Our point of reference is not low enough. I mean, the homeless guy compared to someone dying of cancer on the street, undiagnosed, compared to the coal, like, it can get as bad as humanly possible. So the reason why I bring this up is that we are, in my opinion, a node in a network. And so if you empower yourself, the internal part, like you said, it feels strongly that this realization of your power and your influence and your potential and your abundance with that inside of you, it feels like you can use that to multiply all of the opportunities around you, however fine or minuscule. And I just was thinking, you know, about this last week. It's like, if you take anybody in their scenario, me, some of my friends who are in bad section housing, some of my friends who are millionaires, right? Any scenario possible, it's better to feel empowered, feel like you're responsible, feel like you can do something to make any effort better than to be a victim. This is my opinion, as controversial or not as, you know, as it is. And whenever we look at Steve Jobs, whenever we look at a local guy with a chain of auto body shops, these people cannot be self-made, because that's not how our multivariate environment is. But I think what makes people successful in relationships and in business and in discourse is that self-inquiry, self-actualization. And I think it's the core of everything we can do, because it seems the only thing that we have true control over. So this, to me, applied as a global sphere, this education, this waking up, what you can do, you know, not discounting all of the bad things that are happening, not taking away from people's pain and suffering, but thinking that if I rise myself up, however best I can, to the highest level, others will benefit. And that seems particularly salient.
Joined on the screen by Indy. Thank you, Vermeer. Jerry, we had better find out who Indy is before I have so much to ask him. Thank you so much, Vermeer, again.
Thank you.
Our next panelist is especially easy to find on the screen, and he joins us from Los Angeles. He describes himself as a solutionary entrepreneur, fostering political hope He's a well-being engineer who leads corporate wellness workshops and retreats with Fortune 500 companies, provides burnout and resilience retreats and workshops for healthcare workers, law enforcement and activist organizations, mindfulness workshops with students in schools and universities, and is an active volunteer locally and globally. Indy is a cooperative co-founder with SOGO, a democracy club, developing technology to improve civic engagement and empower citizens with civic wisdom. He's also a co-founder of an education apprenticeship company called Cosmic Labyrinth, which combines volunteering with education and entertainment. He's on the board of advisors for an evolutionary orphanage in Varanasi, India, and is a well-being consultant for several tech wellness projects. Please welcome and meet the amazing Indy Rishi Singh.
Hey everyone, I would say we all are amazing because we're showing up in this space. It's a space of great conflict in our current times. So thank you everybody for showing up. Thank you, Jerry, for the beautiful introduction and making it through all the words. You should use an Indian accent, it helps. Indians speak English very well if you know anything about Indians. But yeah, thank you for hosting this conversation. I feel before we even get started with my perspective on this, I feel it's really important to contemplate the idea of in all our cultures and all our history, we all have a mythology of these thieves, these demons that steal our joy. They're weird, right? They show up. They're the seven sins. You can see it in the Christian and in Islamic culture. They have different names for it. In Indian culture, there's so many different varieties of these. But what are these? Maybe in the chat, you guys can offer your different perspective. But what are these thieves, these demons, these things that come into our mind? They creep up. They're like these really interesting spiritual illnesses, right? Like maybe lust is one of them, right? I mean, you see that pop up. Greed is one of them. We have like so many different ones, and we could see how it's funny. When I went to medical school, I remember we only had like one class on like the DSMs, and the DSM, right? We like literally from lust, for anger, for like all these different things that we know these are deep inherited toxic practices that can build up in our consciousness individually and collectively. There's actually illnesses, like you could diagnose people, but there is nothing for greed. It's so fascinating to me. Like I remember being there in med school and be like, wait, what? I'm so confused here. Like, where's greed? And we have hoarding, but like hoarding is like, that's okay. So what are the different forms of hoarding, right? So anyways, I want to put that in there, that spiritual aspect of like, maybe what we're talking about here is a self-reflection on things that are also within us. Because I'll tell you what, we all have a little billionaire inside of us too. And how do we reconcile with that? How do we play with that idea? If I was a billionaire, what would I do? What kind of actions would I take? And in that same sense, maybe we have a little bit more bandwidth and space that when we do sit down with a billionaire, or we tell stories, or we write articles, or we do whatever, what if we start to plant imagination, right? We plant the imagination for the future. I'm a big student, a big student of imagination. It's like a game changer in my own personal life. The moment I started practicing imagination as a part of my meditative practice, it was like, oh wow, we are creating our reality, like literally. But imagine, look at literally using Zoom. I mean, all the things, our clothes, they were first thoughts. Like nothing we have around us was not a thought first. Like literally people came together with a bunch of thoughts and imagination and they made stuff, right? And so what if that's also true about reality? What if like our focusing on Brave New World, 1984, our focus on those things actually creates those things, right? Instead of like, yes, we want to study it so we don't make it, but what if we over focusing on what could go wrong actually allows that going wrong to happen more? I don't know. I don't know anything, but it's interesting to contemplate this idea of imagination. Where is our imagination in balance right now? Like when we do speak about billionaires, when we do speak about wealth inequality, what are we spending equal amount of time with our imagination? As much as we're talking about where things can go wrong and how bad they are we equally talking about what the ideas are and the imagination where we can go? I wonder. I mean, drop it in the chat. What do you think in your own life? are you focusing your mental energy, your mental psychic energy, at least half of it so you can balance, right? You want to be in the middle, right? Maybe you want to be balanced. Are you spending half of your imagination on the possibilities, on the ideas, on the potential of a billionaire's heart opening up? What does that feel like? What does that look like? What happens when a billionaire does that? So, I want to, before we go into like a little heart experiment, I'm really playing with word magic these days, right? So instead of think tanks or thought experiments, let's do heart experiments and heart tanking, heart-centered technology. Oh, wow, go figure. What would that be like? So before I get there, I just want to share. I'm fortunate to come from the Sikhi culture, and I'm gonna say Sikhi because Sikhi is very unique, right? It's a very modern religion, so it has implications for all of us. Like I just read an article recently about how like we should be focusing on philosophers and saints that lived closer to where we live now, because they can give us a little bit more guidance about how stuff is now, rather than looking at somebody like 2,000-3,000 years ago. So one of the things that's been really powerful in the Sikhi culture, and just a few hundred years ago, this was like something that was literally happening, was there were these super crazy wealth, right? There was a moguls, but then there was also other, hoarders of wealth, right? And hoarders of resources. The Sikhi gurus, right? The gurus, and they were, by the way, they were not religious. They were spiritual leaders, right? They were community leaders. That's not what they weren't about a religion. They were actually like, practice whatever you want, the freedom of religion, the freedom for women to, have power. Like they were all about that. And what happened in that space was they would come up against people who were hoarders. And over again, it was never violence that they used to convert those people from hoarders and resource hoarders to sharing it. It was actually creating amazing art. Like literally, they would create amazing music and art and food. And back in those days, I mean, you guys know this, even now, today, right? It's like Christina Aguilera or whatever, Britney Spears, maybe not the right one. Beyonce, Jay-Z, they get paid millions of dollars to show up at like the Prince of Dubai's, like palace, right, to perform. So even back in those days, they were like, oh my God, you're an amazing artist, you're an amazing performer. We want you to come perform at our palace, our kingdom. These gurus would not do that. They would be like, you got to come and sit on the ground under the tree in the middle of the town with all the villagers. You got to sit with everybody. And then after you experience that, then we'll hang out and we'll talk and we'll have a good time. And when they did do that, like when they could hear the music from a distance and be like, wow, people are having fun, they would show up and they would sit with the people. Non-violently, there would be an opportunity for connection, for sharing of needs and concerns. And wow, lo and behold, without violence, some of these people who are built like the hoarders and the resource hoarders would actually become saints, because they like literally would go from like the extreme greed, extreme hoarding, the extreme like sin, the extreme sin. The pendulum would swing and they would become saints because they understood the opposite. And they became actually guiding forces for other resource hoarders, right? And other whatever, like toxic tyrants, right? So something for us to think about is, wow, like what if it just takes one of those, one billionaire that has an epiphany, that gets connected to somebody who's not going to be compromised by money, an artist, a saint, and a humanitarian that's not beholden to money, that's not operating on the function of money. Do we even have those? Do you know any artists that are doing it not because of money, not because of status, but they're doing it because they love the music they play, the way it connects people? They create food, people who like make food, and they make food just because they want to give it. They want to take care. It doesn't matter what religion, what ideology, they want to give it to people. How many people do we know in our lives that are like that? What if we gave those people as much importance as we give billionaires or influencers or thought influencers? Like, what if we gave intention to those heart influencers, those people who show up in like the Sufi spirit of sharing and connecting? Because within that connecting fabric of art, maybe that's where the dissolution happens of separateness.
Is
right?
this a status thing, Indy, that like, if you give all that stuff away, you get no status, but if you keep it and you drive around in a big car or whatever, then you're worth more, aren't you, as a person? I mean, that's one of the narratives we're fighting here, isn't it?
And at the same time, in my own experiences with folks with a lot of money, they so desperately want fun, cool people around because they don't have fun, cool people. So they're like they want connection. They want to have joy, right? And they think they could pay for it, but you can't pay for it. right? That real essence of joy. And so there is a mental illness almost kind of like, and we all have it a little bit of us, because we delude ourselves with some idea of country, some idea of religion, some idea of economic philosophy. These are all delusions. Choose your delusion wisely, right? But right. But really, for us, more like in this conversation, the pivot, Richard, and I would love for us to kind of share, one of the ideas, the meditation that was coming into my mind was NDE. Do you know what an NDE is? A near-death experience.
Oh, okay.
Near-death experience.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's actually been documentation from surgeons and scientists that have like flipped, right? We're talking like hardcore scientism people that had a near-death experience, and they're like, whoa, okay, there's something fascinating going on here. And they completely change your trajectory of life. What would happen? Let's say Bill Gates had an NDE. Let's say Tesla. Let's do a meditation that they all have a near-death experiments. Can we do a prayer for that? Okay, prayer. Okay, let's have all the billionaires have an NDE. Okay. But what would happen? What would a near-death experience do to a billionaire? What is the potential of that interaction? Maybe the flip side. Maybe if you don't want to be hurtful or harmful, near-death experience not going to kill anybody. It's cool. It's fine. They're going to come back fine. But what if also maybe it's like they connect with a saint or an artist who is living from the heart, and they're touched by that saint. They're touched by the ethos and the quality of joyfulness and life in that saint, and they actually get exposed to that in a genuine way, and they connect with them. They're like, wow. And what happens? Like, what would the billionaire do? Like, what's the heart experiment for that? Like, does anybody want to share?
Yeah.
Anybody on?
Unmute if you want.
Love this idea. Just want to say I love this idea. Why? Because it's giving like a forced perspective, right? What would they do? I mean, they might go insane, right? What have I been doing my whole life with all of this or whatever else? And they might just renounce their wealth, like Siddhartha's story, and go meditate in the mountains. But I mean, it seems clear that always, if you're talking about enlightenment, there's two types, right? One that just explodes and goes into the next dimension. But the interesting one here is the one that returns to the cave, right? Plato's allegory. And he goes to show people, like, you're looking at shadows, like, hey, and you got to make it a little sexy too. You can't just tell people that things are not worth it and then not give them an alternative, because they're just going to go back to their routine behavior. So I think that we're all cemented in our
no thank you sir. Heart, you need to hearting. You need to be hearting.
Yeah, you need to be hearting. And the thing is, if we're talking about religion, right? There's a passage in the Bible which I love, and it's isolation by itself. It's like, the passionate soul knows no fear. It does not calculate risk, right? So this is something that a mind space would fear, right? I'm going to lose this. I have to prepare for this. Nuclear shelter. It comes out in so many different ways. But the fearless, the passionate soul, right, knows that there's nothing to lose. There's only things to give.
And Vermeer, that passionate soul, at least in my own experience from the people that I'm in mentorship and guidance, I'm getting guidance from them, their joyfulness, their passion, their courage and curiosity, it's like a light. Like I feel like a moth, I want to go closer to it. I'm going to be in service of it.
Speaking of a light, I mean, you said guru. I mean, as you know, the definition of guru is remover of darkness, right? So you are a light, literally removing the darkness, the wool over the eyes. All of this sounds esoteric, but it's actually quite real. People come to me and they ask, what do I do? They're seeking for an answer. They're looking for somebody who has the perspective. When you're in that mind confusion and calculation and putting up these walls, it can be very scary. I actually do empathize with these people. We've all been there. Yeah. That's part of our awakening process. So, I don't want to run on too long.
No.
This is an important principle,
I'm conscious that we got Shakri on the screen, and time is whooshing as we might have expected. So don't, I mean, you're all on the Graham sofa couch here, right? I mean, the Graham Norton, sorry, couch. So, you know, the
No
mic's there to
alcohol
be
today.
unmuted. But Jerry, please intro Chakri so that we know who he is, and then we can get him into this conversation. And then we've got Vujani coming up as well.
Joining us from India, our next panelist is a fellow of the European School of Governance. He's an edge walker, taking risks, building bridges, and breaking new ground. Over the last decade, his service as a practitioner, academician, wow, let me try that one again. Practitioner, academician, was built on the foundation of 3 principles: risk as a lens, research as a tool, and project management as a way of life. A strong engineering, project and service orientation and broad-based exposure to construction, manufacturing, engineering, technology, and services segments support his effectiveness as a consultant. His achievement orientation is inspired by Goethe's statement: knowing is not enough, we must apply. Willing is not enough, we must do. By probing risk behavior, he believes in our ability to create a fair, just, and happy global community on a thriving planet, building thought leadership via experiential involvement and grounded in optimization theory and non-linear modeling. He believes that scientific and innovative management techniques will lead to serendipitous and emergent systemic behavior. His interests range from tracking mindset shifts in entrepreneurs, developing group intelligence, supporting the building of ecosystems, and imagineering interventions to challenge problems. I extend a warm family MKAI welcome to Dr. Chakridhar Iyuni. Chakri.
Thank you so much, Jerry. I think you've done too much research on me. Can you enable the screen share so that it's easier for me to?
Of course.
Yeah. So I think Jerry.
You got it, by the way. You've got it.
Yeah, Jerry talked about 2 of the spaces that I'm very proud to be a part of, and I've learned a lot. And that's the European School of Governance, and also Edgewalker community that Judy Neal runs. It's a phenomenal this thing. When Jerry came with this idea, I said, well, shouldn't everybody be worshipping? Only thing is, why should anybody worship another person? As you know, in India, everybody worships. Otherwise, you wouldn't go through the day. So this is what my spaces are. Last 2 years, I've been trying to go past all the things Jerry was mentioning, figuring out what is agency, how do we act, why do we act, and how do we develop. And so part of my learnings came from these places, the East Side Institute, especially in relational sociology. I just want a quick shout out to the Tamkeen Community Foundation, because this is the inspiration that got me to all these other spaces as well. So one of the things that I've been kind of tracking with my friends in Africa is something that had happened to all of us. I mean, well, the global South, the last 200-300 years is still happening. And that's the strange part, because I was just trying to calculate what's the debt of the bottom 30 countries in the per capita numbers, and any of these billionaires could easily have paid off all the debt. Anyway, so the modus operandi that I'm watching, I'm trying to get my hands around, seeing what's the mitigation for it or the contingent action for it, is typically somebody gives aid and gets subsidy for it, grabs natural resources, and then sells finished product to that country. And also this aid that is given seems to create a strange type of, it basically divides the country into a rich country, a rich element and a poor element. I've seen this in many of the African nations. You won't believe how the capital city in some of these countries are reminiscent of New York City, and the rest of the country is in abject poverty. The other thing that's driving global commerce, global action is this dependence on bare minimum economic viability and military security from a few nations, whether it's just the US or it's China, it's some of the other countries as well. Something is happening that reminds me of hegemony of sorts. So when billionaires are getting created, I think it's also partly coming out of organizations, because without organizations, you cannot be a billionaire. And I'm wondering, when will organizations all become teal organizations? And so like organizations like Bootzog, where there isn't a billionaire out of their organization, even though their revenues are huge. So I think something about having teal organizations emerge from all around the world will kind of subdue these billionaires and bring them to a purposeful living. So the other thing that seems crazy is we used to have kings and merchants and missionaries roaming around the world, and then somewhere in the last century, nations became important. And now I think more important than nations are these corporations, which are basically the progression is at these corporations now are not in anybody's control. They're having a free reign. And I'm hoping at some point it'll be the communities that will govern and not corporations or nations. So there's a very inspiring sermon by the Vietnamese monk Thich Nhat Hanh, and he was saying that the next Buddha could be an enlightened community. And so I've been asking a couple of my friends on what is enlightenment, especially in the context of communities, and said any group of people who can keep learning with a humility, with an acceptance, and keep developing and keep nurturing everything around them is enlightened. So I'm hoping one of these days MKAI will be one of those enlightened communities. So the other thing that has happened is our notion of development was always, I think in the last 150 years, morality has been redefined many number of times. Yet, when we talk about development in the global south, it's never been towards building strength and resilience. So that's a strange part of it. And I'm not blaming it on the billionaires or the organizations. It's just the systemic view that of the situation that we are in today. So the couple of misguided narratives, I think some of these things got talked about. Carsten talked about consumption, competition. I think some of these are misguided. And how do these misguided narratives take root? It's kind of pretty well known. The corporations try to be tax-free. They influence policy by PACs, by investing funding into PACs, and then making sure that political promises don't get evidenced, even if there is any truth to it. So what is happening? For me, I feel that everybody's just trying. They want to say that they are surviving, and in that belief that they are doing for survival, their immortality, so to speak, and they're self-serving, and that essentially leads to profits over people or environment. So I think the question was, okay, what do we do about it? I mean, so I'm just looking at it from my life cycle view of what happens. There are folks who are not billionaires, and then they become billionaires, and then maybe some of them lose their money as well, or they die rich, like what John was saying. So my feeling is that something is happening before they become billionaires that is not the right inputs. So I'm not blaming it on the education system. I think it takes a village to raise a child, so the village needs to take care of that. So something else happens when they are billionaires. So while there is a regulatory environment, the regulatory environment obviously is in their control. So the regulatory environment is not strong enough to keep them in control. So is self-regulation possible? And that's what probably Indy is hinting at. And so what happens when you're relinquishing, or you're not a billionaire anymore? I think that's the time when they could nurture the next generation, owning up to their mistakes, getting a long view of sorts. And I think this long view will probably move away from profits, and it'll get to think about communities and the environment as well. So the other thing that I was assessing was billionaires can be thought of as a businessman in the sense of an economic engine. So this is their typical role, right? The other is a billionaire as a philanthropist. But something goes wrong as a philanthropist, because it's now their skewed personal private view of the world, or of the existential crisis, or of their morality. So and both of these roles don't seem to be working. But fortunately, like, there is a third alternative, and this it just gave me a lot of hope in reading and in talking to Judy Neal, and this is the Edgewalker behavior. So Judy spent a lot of time with CEOs in the US, mid 90s, where these CEOs said, we know how to make profits, but we don't know how to do social good. So that was the exploration these CEOs had with Judy, and I think there's a lot to learn from that exercise. So as Jerry was saying, edge walkers are those who walk between worlds, who have the ability to build bridges. And so we have a billionaire-driven world, and we have whatever the new frontier is. So we need edge walkers. Maybe some of these edge walkers are current billionaires or not, and we need them to create that transformation. I think in talking to Richard and the MKAI team, I think something that came out very seriously for me was systemic responsibility. I think somebody was mentioning karma in the chat, and I think the point is whether there are billionaires, whether we are responsible for their creation. What is our role anyway? I mean, are we just going to twiddle our thumbs? I think that's a serious question, and it's a responsible question. And I think the first thing is, if you label and say a billionaire is doing this or a billionaire is doing that, we are kind of fixing the problem. We are kind of making it rigid, and I think it makes it unresolvable. The other thing is, the way we behave is primarily social, yet the world that we live in, our interdependence is quite indirect. I mean, unlike when you look at swarms of bees, or you look at elephants or any of the other animal kingdom, they're pretty close to each other, and they regulate each other's behavior. That doesn't seem to happen in human beings. This thing about billionaires are there's a monologue there. There is no, I think that it's kind of a broken record on, okay, this is the money, there's no money, there will be money, or money won't allow it, or we need to put more money. I think we need to get beyond the idea or the notion of only money is important. I think an example, I think we're talking about, Tina was talking about Maslow's pyramid. So maybe talking about the transpersonal elements like love. So what's love got to do with it is one of the key questions that some of my spaces keep reminding us about. So can the talk about love replace money? So I think Carsten mentioned robber barons, and so I think in the past people are building tribes and we've had robber barons as well. And what are these billionaires? Are they both, or something even worse? So there's a question that Richard asked me: is this a mental condition, like an illness? And so, yeah, I don't think I don't think it's any different. I think we are in an age where neurodiversity and respect for neurodiversity is quite important. So I think we need to respect that. My only submission for now, given that Vemir is here, and I've put some of those things down, coming out of Buddhism, is I think there may be an extreme form of subscribing to these myths of permanence, of individuality, and that the billionaires are above suffering or want to be above suffering. So in that sense, there is a mental condition of sorts. And I think Indy talked a lot about mindfulness, so I'll skip that. So something that worries me a lot, when Milan Kundera was asked about, he had seen the horrors of the Nazi Germany, and he was asked about how did he reason about it? And he said, if a human being can think about any horror, another human being can make it happen. So the challenge for us is, can we create a social fabric? Can we create systems which can preclude these horrors of genocide, of wars, of terrorism, of religious and ideological persecution? I think then the needle would have moved. Thank you very much for listening to this monologue of sorts, and let's yeah.
Could you just obviously, great, thanks. Could you just articulate that last point you mentioned? What would have moved the needle? If you could just repeat that, Kristen.
Right. So I think we've created some horrors for ourselves. I mean, like what essentially Nick Bostrom says, existential crises. So are we able to create social systems which will preclude these things from happening? Right now, so in the 60s, there were, I've seen some simulations of how nations influence each other, that they will not be the first to use the nuclear bomb against another country. So in some sense, there was some control on each other. I don't think any of the simulations will hold true today. So what is it that we need to develop that makes sure that these horrors don't happen?
Evergreen. Yeah, evergreen things that last a long time. Not sustainable, Paul. Sorry. Thank you, guys.
Thank you both very much. And,
just a small comment. You could just to evoke the now deceased David Graeber again, who wrote the brilliant book Debt: The First 5,000 Years, where in the past, where you had a ruler that would amass incredible wealth by everybody being indebted to him. After some years, they will be forgiven that debt. And so the point is here, there was a feedback loop that somehow corrected. So you could say the French Revolution was just a local feedback loop, but the whole point is there, we currently do not have a feedback loop. And that's, of course, why the situation is getting out of hand. Yeah. Thank you for a great presentation.
Thank you, Carsten.
Thank you, Jerry.
Last but not least, our final panelist joins us from Geneva, Switzerland, the head of the Matrix Regeneration Group Laboratory, an architect, urban planner, education management journalist, AI philosopher, collective intelligent, experimenter, and technology visionary. Research focuses on governance, social and urban programs with humans, cybersecurity, AI, blockchain, AR, VR, and data management. The founder of Antiverse, a fair metaverse project for fair families, humanitarians, universities, and businesses with revolutionary protocols underlying FAIR Web 3.0. The founder of Angels, human networks with caring volunteers around the world who solve communities' issues of trust, violence, fear, poverty, disaster, starvation, with the goal of leading them to wealth. Please welcome Virginie Guignard-Legrand.
Thank you very much for my presentation. Thank you. I am going to share my screen. So thank you. It was a very enormous presentation of me, of myself. It's good. Thank you. So I start. I want to talk with you about the star system. Star systemics make us dreamers. With globalization, we passed from individual to collective society. The collective hope, the new model, is to shine like a star in the crowd. Billionaires are a part of the star system as actors, singers, superheroes. Startups are in the stars systemics too. For one startup successful, you have 9 startups falling. Economics are following the star system model of dreamers. Dreamers are people part of the crowd who are not anymore satisfied of their life. They want to live another life and focus on stars' lives. And it doesn't matter if they are losing their soul, their future, or their life. Success, anyways, is a model. Here is the pyramid of Maslow I have rewrite 5 years ago. And I wanted to show this pyramid because in the whole world, what I am calling the whole world, is the world was standing 20 years ago, and which collapse, in fact, and now is taking, the new world is taking his place. So in the whole world, the people were scaling step by step the pyramid, and it was a hierarchical model, which we know for 5 centuries, you know. But now the new model is to jump directly to from the bottom to the top of the pyramid. So it is the big change of the big difference between the old world and the new world, and it is we can see it through the star system. Why? What happened? What makes us arriving to this tipping point? There were a crisis of identities in global world. Old family roots are not enough anymore. Feeling of no hope in future is worldwide. Be careful. We have to be careful about the words we are using. State of minds are made with choices of words. Rising kids and not breeding kids leads to rising stars hope. You know, the word we are using are very, very important because they are the seed of the future. The seeds of the future. Hope outside of people, of themselves, is not good because it is a symptom of that they are losing hope about their future, you know, because if you are hope inside yourself, you are strong enough to go in your future. If you are no more hope, no more roots, no more rope, it is connected together, you can have hope in your future. So you are looking for other kind of hope, and this other kind of hope in most of the worldwide over the world is the star system. What's happened more? The sanitary crisis created a lot of post-traumatic shocks with a lot of victims in survival mode. Victims population was leveled up from 30% of the population to 45% of population toward mindset poverty. because sanitary crisis don't make directly poor people, but it is making them isolated from other people, and at the end, several years later, they will be poor too. They will lose their wealth. So it is very important to fix this situation. And another problem, which is in the same time, is the food and energy crisis of these days that will create more poverty worldwide. I estimate from 45 to 60% of global population. And when you have a population of victims, it's clear it is difficult for them to go ahead in the future. They have no more hope, so they will find solution outside of themselves. Hope of the star system could be the main their main hope, you see. And it is similar, in fact, with the area of the end of Roman Empire, you see. We have something similar, but with not a crisis, but with the will to find hopes of outside of ourselves. All about these problems are happening because of the modelization, the way our brain are thinking. You know, we are thinking with model. The way we are taught, the way is the same that the ways we are professional. It's the same that the way we think our life. It is the same that the way we are communicate with our kids. That means that it is a cycle. And if you change one of these four parts, you will change the future, because everything is linked. So we have choice, but if we want another future, we have to change the cycle of model that we have been taught in our everyday life. So the world is made with modelization too. Modelization of the brain is made with knowledge. So, and knowledge and modelization with knowledge. Pure knowledge, I like science. Unknown knowledge. Unknown knowledge doesn't mean that the knowledge are not a reality. It's a knowledge which can be understandable by the people. So this knowledge are existing, but they are not visible, they are not seen, because we need sometimes some decades to understand they were already in our present. And historical knowledge. I'm talking about that because it's important to understand where we are now with the knowledge and with the way we are dealing with our communities, and the best way to have to find resources to understand our history is to go in the past. And in the past, you see, in our direct past, in the whole world, as I was talking before about, it is a hierarchical structure, pyramidal structure of governance for 5 centuries. But before these 5 centuries, for millenniums, the structure were not hierarchical. They were decentralized, you see. And most in the Middle Age, I take the example of the Middle Age, I'm talking about the Occidental history because I am specialist about this history, but I don't know the history of India or Asia and so on. I know the history of Occident. In Occident, in the Middle Age, the castle, the town were linked together with decentralized system. That means that they could help each other through the proximity of in their area. You see, and with the beginning of Renaissance, we have changed the way we were dealing with governance, and we have started with the industry. We have changed the way we were govern the population, because in the Middle Age, the people were free to go where they want, to work where they want. At the beginning of the Renaissance, with the new tools arriving, most of people knows the printing book as the symbol of Renaissance. But what I think it's a real symbol of Renaissance, which has changed fundamentally the way we are dealing with the work, the way we are dealing with society, with human body and so on, is the arrival of a spinning machine, because spinning machine have obliged people to stay in factory, you know, and before in the Middle Age, they could be able to do their work everywhere they wanted. At the beginning of the Renaissance, they have started to be obliged to stay in a place to work for someone or for themselves, but they were not free anymore to work where they want. And it is the beginning of the hierarchical structure. And it was for 5 centuries. And 1 century ago, we have seen arriving a new change, because innovation, a lot of innovation had arrived at the end of the 19th century. And it was a huge change in innovation. But when you have change in innovation, you have to know that change in innovation are 20 years ahead front of human and society changes. That means that when you have a huge innovation like blockchain, which was arriving 10 years ago, you have to imagine that this innovation is only just before the change of the society. And so now on my presentation, you can see people all linked together like it is in blockchain systemic. And that means that it is normal change. But as you can see, the decentralized system was before Renaissance, and now we go again to a decentralized system. That means that for me, the history is like a wave model. That means that in the history, you can find parts of our future. That means that what we have, the humanity has lived in the past, could be lived again in the future. And so that means, and history is made of our life, personal life, country's life, universe life, and about our. And it is made with little pieces of every one of us, and it is making the big history. But the big history, in fact, is, as I told before, it is a wave. It's not a circle, because you are not going from Middle Age and arriving at this time. And we had 6 centuries in the middle, so it is not a circle. It is a wave, and this wave is made with pieces, similar pieces that we can maybe find again in the very far past and or in the future, you see, because in fact we're in the history are only sequence of our time, and they are made of model from the past. See, and I have an example which is similar about what we are living now. It is, I'm talking about the Great Depression at the beginning of the 20th century. And it is similar to what I'm calling the Great Crisis, which is arriving, because we are started with a crash of markets and the problems with bank, the problems with businesses, with the jobs, and the poor people here in the middle are falling. And at the end of this part of historical DNA, I can say, we have the change, because we are too much homeless people and too much famine and so on. So we can't go ahead in a world like that, you see, because even if there is some big businesses, big lobbies, you know, if the world is not sustainable anymore, they will have some kind of revolution, you see, and but not violent revolution. I'm not sure about that, but revolution of the mindset, first of all, because we have to find other solutions to be sustainable for in the future. With the COVID, we have seen we are all in one earth. You see, we are all one community, global community. And now with the crisis arriving, everyone on the earth will have problem with food, with energy. So it will make this global community more collaborative together. And I hope that we will find all together solution to change what is not working now in our world. You see, one tool which is interesting is sustainable development goals. But you know, I have an organization, and I have in the presentation we talk about my angels networks and so on. So we are looking for, about people who are in violent area in Africa, and we open new groups in Switzerland because I think there is some poverty in Switzerland. We have to do things in Switzerland too, but in Africa we have seen that these goals are made for international institution. You know, it is made in a patriarchal mindset. That means that for our purpose, because we are running an ecosystem, so we try to fix a problem in all the dimensions. And for us, it is lacking a lot of 19 goals are lacking in this first list. So because also dimensions about collaboration between people, between autonomizations of people, auto-determinations of people, of communities, all these parts are not really, it could be not good, well explained, or not at a good place for us, or it is lacking. So for us, we now are working with our communities with 36 sustainable development goals, because we need them. And we welcome also people who want to go ahead with us. It's not, it's for us, it's okay, it's not a problem. But for us, these ways of dealing with governance of the problems worldwide is not enough, and is not matching all the problems we really have to fix, you know. And what I see now worldwide.
Virginie, I need you to wrap up in 60 seconds.
Okay. And what I say is it's that we see governments worldwide who are adopting these goals, but these goals are not complete. So that means that we have to be very careful about that, because parts of things won't be fixed or governed because of that. And now we are launching a new project, which is Fair World and Web for you. It is about now we know that there is new Web 3.0, and for us it's not enough because it is only digital. And I think for me, it's important to mix humanity and digital. You can't do digitals without the governance of humanity. So you have to make them all together to be one. And in the middle, we have the logo of the copyright, because it is very important for us to be focused on the value of the humanity, and the value of the humanity is made for us.
Thank you so much, Virginie. We're out of time. Thank you so much. We're hanging on afterwards, but we got to do our wrap up now. Thank you so much for your presentation and all those words, and I'm sure we can hear more about that. I just want to use the last couple of minutes to say a few thanks. So those of us that have been on this journey today with us, we will be carrying on in 2 minutes from now, but we must finish on time out of respect for everybody that's lent us their ears and their eyes and their hearts today. So thank you, first of all, to Jerry, who's been introducing the wonderful contributors that we've had today. Thank you for Vermeer, well, that's hard to say, isn't it, for being on the screen today. Jazel, we have missed very much, but she was in the background. So it was a bit of a lad show today, but that's just the way the dice rolled this time. And of course, thank you so much to those who prepared and came to reflect on this subject, which of course was Bettina, who launched us today, Carsten, who then contributed, then John Thor, Indy, Shakri, and then just now, Virginie. And if you've got more time, Virginie, please do stick around and we can finish off that last slide that I had to ever so slightly jump in on. So thank you for all the messages on the chat. You know where we are, mkai.org. And we're on team at mkai.org to get in contact with us, and you can find us fairly easily on LinkedIn. So do stay in touch. I posted the WhatsApp group link as well, where we continue our conversations in between our forums, which I would encourage everybody to come along to and spend time in if you can. Just popping that here again. You are very, very welcome to hop into there. We're back again next month. Our colleague Adelia is organizing a wonderful event looking at the power and potential of gaming and gamification on the climate crisis. That will be in November. Do you want to say a quick word on that, Adelia?
Yes, absolutely. Stay tuned. It will be a very interesting one. It's a second part of our series on sustainability. So it will be around how we can mitigate climate change and what we can do actually in our everyday life. So hope to see you there.
Yeah, looking forward to it. And so keep your eyes peeled. You'll hear from us about that very soon. And thank you for organizing that one, Adelia, and being with us today. It's 7 o'clock UK time, and whatever your time is, morning, evening, afternoon, night, it's just a great pleasure to be here with you. I'll call time on this session today. Go and enjoy your day and your life. And if you want to stick around, I'd love to hear some more thoughts on this subject, reflections, ideas, general chat, these kind of things. Everybody's welcome, those that have been contributing and those that have been more spectating today. So thanks again, and thanks for going through this topic with us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That brings us all back together, I think. There we go. Wow. I'm just seeing who's here that I hadn't spotted before. Maria's here. Anna, I saw you contributing a few times on the chat, which is always wonderful to see. John Thor, what did you make of that session? It's been good to have you back again.
Well, it's good to be back. And one of my main takeaways is, well, in a way, this is kind of redundant because it's my takeaway after every MKAI, is I just love the fact that it always ends up being, even though there's one topic, everyone brings such different takes to it and approaches. And I'm always kind of brought back to, I was hired some years ago by a wealth management company to help their partners get better at public speaking. And one of the factors that they brought up early on was every time we go to these financial events, it's just a bunch of white guys in suits talking about compound interest. And at every one of these events, it's just, we're just adding to that army of white guys in suits talking about compound interest, and no one cares, no one remembers us because we're just like everyone else. And I spent time with them just figuring out how each of them could bring perspective to the topics still related to things like investment, wealth management. And with my views, it was probably the last gig I ever thought I was going to get, but it happened. But looking back, I completely understand that can become an issue with a lot of events, that they become a little bit too homogenous. There's too much repetition. And I've always felt at all of the MKAIs I've spoken at or attended otherwise, there's been such a great wealth of difference of not just opinion, but perspectives and point of views, which I guess is part of the inclusive part of the moniker. So I always appreciate that.
There's a couple of things, and I see some cameras that come on, so I don't want to monopolize this conversation. A couple of things that didn't come up today, which I thought might, which is this idea that they, the billionaires, if we focus on, they don't really have the money, do they? They have a sort of a shareholding, and so they can't just, give away millions and millions because they don't really have it. And that didn't come up, but the argument that I was researching, if it did, is that yes, in theory that's true, but they're also maintaining a system, we all are, where that ownership of the company is only possible through wealth, and that could be changed, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be that way. And to be more specific about this, that's not the full story here. And there's a new fad that's come along, which is the dual class of share, where you and me, John Thor, can buy shares in a company, but we have no control over that country because we have a second-class share, and only the founders and the true real shareholders, are the ones that have the active shares. And 42% of tech companies IPO'd using dual-class shares last year. And so, go on.
Oh, I was just going to say that was so. Originally, I had this part in my notes. Because obviously we talked about this before, and it's definitely an element in this, and an example of the dual share approach. If we look at this recent donation, so-called, of Patagonia, where not only did the founder of Patagonia donate the 98% of the company to a charity owned by him and his family, but it is also founded as a charity that is allowed to use its money for political gain and political power. And on top of that, the 2% ownership that he retains is the 2% that controls the company and the board seats. So it's absolutely true. But I think another aspect of this, and I would have tied this originally into, I guess, the points that I made about it's not just about shifting of wealth, it's about changing of systems, is because, yes, they may not have, a Scrooge McDuck-sized vault of cash lying around, but it doesn't change the fact that money, hypothetical or not, does mean power. I can't go out to a bank and say, lend me $100 million because Forbes just published a list where I'm at the top of it. But if I was at the top of that list, I could easily get people invested in pretty much anything I do. And that is a power that's not afforded to the many.
Elon Musk just sold 30,000 bottles of aftershave that's called burnt hair. Yeah. It's sold out. I mean, nobody even knows what it smells like.
Probably burnt hair.
Well, one has to imagine there might be a little more to it, but possibly, which is a bit Reggie Perrin, if anybody remembers that, where you sell absolute crap.
Richard.
Yeah, go on, Michael, jump in, yeah.
You mentioned in what you just said that they're different than what we may think. And in a chapter of my career, more than a decade ago, I bumped into and worked with quite a few of these billionaires. And when I worked with the first one, and then the second, and the third, and the fourth, I was genuinely surprised. They were very different than what I thought they would be. They are very simple in the sense of how they engage. Inside their homes, inside their companies, inside their office, they are genuinely regular people. The first, the second, the third. So I saw consistencies. One of the speakers today said that they are lonely. He used, I think, different words. They are insulated. As one of them said to me, if I give through you $500,000 to a charity, would it get me friends? And I was surprised, because why would a billionaire needs friends. The speaker today said it. They don't have friends. And I asked, why would you need to give $500,000 to a charity and need help to do it to get friends? And he said, because every single person I meet comes for business and not for friendship. And I was stunned that the question was so blunt, so unusual. And the third thing is that we make them billionaires. All these people hire this generation of genuinely talented, gifted people. It's the people that they hire that made them billionaires. What's common in all of them, even the Elon Musk, is look at who they hire. They're billionaires because they have a sense to hire the generation that we have created of unbelievably talented people. This generation populating this planet is unusually gifted. That created the billionaires, not talent in investment. The engineers, the marketers, the business people, the investors, they hire them. These are the generation of billionaires. They have a good nose to hire talent.
Michael,
this is my conclusions from working with them, sitting next to the island in their kitchen. This is who they are. Regular people with a good nose.
Michael, I can't disagree with anything you've said, and thank you so much for sharing those experiences. That's fascinating to hear, and that you could relay it to what you've heard. One company that comes to mind, and I honestly don't want to dominate this conversation. I hope I'll be quiet for the rest of it, ideally. I just wonder how many millionaires and billionaires we have through literally one company. That's Uber. And Uber's been a massive wealth creation platform. I think it was brought up earlier on, wasn't it? Yes. But are we aware that Uber's never made a profit, and that Uber's hoovered up $25 billion of investment? So as a talking point, maybe not, we have these unicorns that, follow Jeffrey Funk on LinkedIn. They don't make any money, and then they're almost never supposed to. And you just keep pouring it until you can get the IPO, and then the original investors get out as fast as humanly possible. Then they get their return, and any mugs like me who thought it looked like a good bet are then left with the sinking ship as it now sinks in share price, because what do I know about investing? And it's a powerful fictional vehicle, to generate wealth, and it's just one of many, I guess. And so that's the system I think that we're operating in. That's it can't last. That will eat itself for sure, I would say. Anyway, I'll be quiet now. Shaka, you posted in the chat, didn't you? But I see we have others as well. So
I think there were lots of chat messages from Yangbo and Abdul and Anna, and love to hear from some of them. But just quickly, I have a friend who's worth a couple of $100 million, and he says, I can't just give out money. People will. He doesn't want to cultivate beggars around him or something, and he doesn't know what to do with it. So, yeah, kind of understand what Michael is saying, but I'm not sure.
I think just to kind of add to that, and then unfortunately I do have to run, but when Richard and I, we did this podcast, is it 2 years ago now, or a year and a half ago maybe, where the main part of this podcast were interviews with experts in sustainability and digital sustainability and sort of the future of sustainable tech. And one of the most common things that came up in conversation is how often it's difficult to know what is the right choice, what is the right thing to invest in, what's the right thing to do. And I think to your point with your friend there, not knowing where to put the wealth, whether that is an accurate estimation or whether it's a little bit of an excuse, I don't know. But I do think that even for people who aren't millionaires, just in terms of which products to buy, how to recycle, there's some really interesting, for example, YouTube channels that cover this. Like if someone here has watched things like Climate Town, which is a very entertaining YouTube channel, which kind of dissects things like the scams that happen around recycling companies. And it's why when it comes to, at least when I talk about anything like this, I always come back to the system at its foundation is what we need to change. We can't just say we'll take 100 million there, 100 million there. It'll help in the short term, but in the long run, we're still feeding into a system of inequality. So I think I completely understand when people do struggle to know exactly where to put their focus, effort, and energy.
I said I wouldn't jump in, but I'm just, that point just always gets to me, that you take someone like Bill Gates, and Bill Gates says what you're saying is, well, I could give this million away or this billion away, and he does, and there's I'm sure there's some Bill Gates fans around, but he's very concerned about the ethics of what he gives away and whether it gets to the right people, and so are many other philanthropists. But that was not the case when they made the money. I mean, Zuckerberg would take anyone's money from anywhere in the world, but I bet when it comes to giving it away, he starts saying, oh, well, I'm not sure if that's going to go to the right place. And there's a hypocrisy there, isn't there?
Yeah. So also they have their own, so Bill Gates wants to put only in some places. So it's their dystopian views of what is required of the world. It's not what the world needs. And I mean, they have no intention of conversing with the world and figuring out what the world needs. Okay, so they're just, I mean, like, it seems like they're making more money and not making money.
But this is only a part of the story to both of you, because they are also responsible for developing some of the more cutting-edge technologies and sophisticated tools that philanthropy will forever benefit from, which track how money is allocated. Now you're tapping into my background, that which brought me to these billionaires, helping them to allocate these hundreds of millions of dollars. So Bill Gates and others, by being picky on how the money is given, pushed also Clinton, the president, by insisting that every dollar is counted, encouraged some of the wise guys and ladies in technology to come up with these tools. We owe them for being business people with their money, because the world of philanthropy now enjoys it. Those who want to track every cent can now use these tools, because decades ago, there were these insinuations, maybe it's not genuine, maybe it's not real. We all benefit from it. Not everybody wants it. And many people today, Richard, say, take the check and I don't want to hear about it. But those who want, they can track every cent.
I'm not jumping in so that I'm leaving space for others. Otherwise, I would comment, Michael, for sure.
Most of philanthropy now, the heavy hand, is populated by business people. And I think part of what we can offer them is that wave of decade or two ago of those who wanted to track it. And this is the generation of Bill Gates.
I didn't know if Anna, if you were waving, but just on Bill Gates, before perhaps we move on, I was talking to a senior member of the one of the UN parties. I'll keep it fairly low key. And he was telling me all about COP and the power structures at COP. And, he said, there's certain people you can meet with, Schwarzenegger and Bloomberg and so on, walk around trying to make themselves useful and so on. And then you've got the state ministers and the prime ministers and presidents, he said. And then there's Bill Gates. And he said, and Bill Gates will take an office and you will book some time if you're lucky to see him. And you'll walk past that office and queuing outside is global presidents hoping to get their 5 minutes with Bill Gates. And it just brings home the power structure, right?
Anna wanted to say something, Richard.
There's several things. It's not an either or, it's an and both. philanthropy is a good thing and it helps people, and it's selective. It's just focused on whatever interest the philanthropist focuses on. And the reality is we need that funds be distributed to all things that are needed. And many of the things that are needed are not necessarily the things that are in the radar of the philanthropist. And you talk about feeling isolated. Yes, they feel isolated, but there's also the system that they themselves contribute and create keeps them isolated. Let's just think about how they travel. Instead of traveling in an airline with everybody else, even when they travel on an airline with everybody else, then they have these salons where they can go and isolate themselves until the flight comes on, and then they're the first on and the first off. So there's really no interaction between the common people and them. And there's a fear of, people just want my money and just want my interest. They don't want me. So until we change that, the way that they see things, and the way that we see them, we're still going to be them and us, them and again, and either or rather than both. So it's how can you really bring those in? Where are those bridges that really talk about the connection and bring the connection of the humanity? Because we see that billionaires and all those, we see when there's big investments, the only ones that can invest are those that have a certain amount of money. They are the only ones that are permitted to invest. So the rest of us would never have a chance to invest in those aspects because we don't have the minimum of the $500 billion or $1 million to invest in this. So the more we do this, again, it's all a system until we change the system that runs this. Even before Reagan, there was a little bit more balance, but some of the regulations for the millionaires were taken away with Reagan, and then unbridled capitalism just kept going. So there is no accountability to stakeholders, just to the owners of stockholders. So again, it's a systemic problem. And until we change the system, and the question is, how do we change the system? What are the steps that we can take, each one of us and as a collective, to change the system? No one has given up power willingly. When Martin Luther King was able to bring change, it was not because people didn't sacrifice. People sacrificed a lot to make this happen. All Black people did not take the bus for more than a year. Think about that. Think about having to go to work, but not being able to take the bus because on principle, you have decided not to take the bus. You go where you're going to be thrown dogs and you're going to be sprayed with massive amounts of water that can peel your skin off your back. And yet they did it to bring about change. So change has never been easy, even for pacifists. So how can we change the system now? That's the question.
Anna, I want to relate only to one thing which you said, because I work in the work I do now, 75% of the population I serve is the population which you described in the last part of what you said, which I now admire. So you can imagine moving from the billionaires I worked with to the population, the 75%, which I think is America. I think Anna disappeared. No, you're here. Which I believe is the true America, the underserved. I want to give you two scenarios, which I'm very much familiar with. Apropos the private flights, the rich airplanes, those G4, G5 private airplanes. Because I'm very much familiar with these. I want to give you these two options. One is that you sit in these several private cars and you enter through a separate gate at the airport and you go to that private airplane and nobody is disturbed. Most people do not notice it. You take off and off you fly. The option you describe is that the airplane, the 787, is loaded, all the passengers are in it, the plane is supposed to take off, the pilot is told to wait, and then the billionaire, the bodyguards, the entourage comes on. Everybody sees it. The plane waits because of the wealth, and the flight leaves late. You know my opinion. I prefer it not to be done this way. It's way more greedy. It's way more in the public's eye. And I felt bad. First of all, because I belong to the economy section, and I happen to be in the group of the billionaire. And it rubs on your skin when everybody has to wait for the billionaire and his or her entourage to board the 787. It should be done, to my opinion, unfortunately, away of public's eye, in that private access, in that fancy, many hundreds of millions airplane with nobody seeing it. Yes, it costs a fortune, but it should be done, I believe, this way, not disturbing anybody.
What's the difference between them going and boarding in the class section?
They will never board the regular flight. Never, ever board.
That's the problem. That's the problem.
They will never board the regular flight. They will never stand in Heathrow in security or going through customs or going through the international crossing. It will never, ever happen. They have a special section in each of these airports, and they go through that section, which is called the VIP section, no matter what.
Unfortunately, that's the problem.
And the airport benefits from it, and the economy of these airports and the countries benefits from it. They go through it, and they pay an arm and leg for that.
Okay, and then again, that's the problem, because then there is no interaction, no humanity contact, no common ground, because
not at the airport, not at the airports that we created.
Yeah, and everywhere else.
I'm with Anna on this. What you're talking about, inconveniences, still needs to shift. I think the interactions with common people are important. There used to be stories in the old days about kings dressed as commoners and being with the commoners.
But we're not talking about interaction with commoners or people. We are talking about boarding flights. And boarding flights, which I take very often, is one of the most horrendous things that we have created.
I understand that situation, but the billionaires are essentially isolating themselves from the rest of humanity. And they feel that they are special because of that. The problem is of being special, of being privileged, and of wanting to preserve that privilege. That's the challenge, Michael, for me.
Yes, but you want me to say what is really happening, right? You don't want me to say what's popular to hear. Right?
Sure. No. I really like that view, because you've been around with them, and unless we talk honestly and openly, and then now figure out what to do with that.
You will be with them in the restaurants, you will be with them in the malls, in the streets, in the hotels, but they will not be in the airports and in the flights the way we created it. We created something which looks like, I'm trying to figure out how to give an analogy which doesn't sound awful, but we created a beast. It doesn't function well. unfortunately. By the way, in some airports, it does function well. So some have figured out wisdom, but in others, it is a beast.
So I see Maria has had her hand up before I did, so I don't want to jump the queue. So Maria, what?
No, I didn't put my hand up, but I just wanted to say that Anna, she was talking about improving the system, and obviously the most shocking is that the system shouldn't be just counting the figures of going from ordinary people to billionaires or other way around. And there's so much to our life and to sustain life, not only for people, but for plants and for animals on the planet, and that we as people, we need nature to recover or for our well-being and for even social interactions. And there are so many things that are connected, and every £1, $1, or whatever currency it is, it's not about the amount of the money, but the value that it gives to society, like a social value or ecological value, or so many similar things. And it's just pity that there are so many people who are isolating the problem and making it even bigger, and making it just figures and not the real problem.
Yeah, I see we have many Marias. Thank you, Maria. I raised my hand. and thank you. It's been a nice conversation. And Anna, you know, I always agree with you on most of those things, but I find your viewpoints always amazing. I just have a small disagreement with you today. I think I'm going to agree with Michael on the flights issue, because when I look at it this way, Anna, I think that wherever we look at it, the higher you go, you find that we have different expectations on the people we feel like have more money than us. And I'm looking at it from where I come from the African perspective. I'm not a millionaire, very far from it, but being one of the only few, or maybe one of the only few people in my community that came out of the township, got an education and worked better, and everybody looks up to you as if you are wealthy. They don't look at how much work you put in, how much value you're adding even into that community. All they think about is how now you should use the little money that they think you have more, because it's much more than what they have. And so I can give you a short story where I remember I once visited one of my communities that I contribute to very well. And I decided not to sleep at our family home. I had so many assignments and meetings, and I slept in a hotel across the street from our home, and I offended everybody because the cost of the hotel is the cost of their rent for the whole month. You understand? But at the same time, I had meetings, I needed Wi-Fi, I needed to be in a good place, I needed to be on Zoom with you so that I'm not in that crowded space with all my community friends and relatives. And so when you say that, you say you want a billionaire to come into the plane with you, you remind me of my community, because they are saying, I don't care about the value you're adding. All I know is you have more money than me, so you should still be doing what I'm doing and live the same way that I'm doing, and forget about all the contributions you're making, like building cool apps that I'm using to make these complaints right now and being able to be on Zoom, which is still a contribution to us, to society. So I totally agree with everything else that you say, and I totally agree with the systems that need to change. But I think we need to look at it from the perspective as well of what other value are those people adding to us? And are we really being realistic by wanting and asking more from them and choosing to ignore the value? And if they choose to live a certain way, is there a reason why they have to live that way? So I think I totally agree with Michael.
Yeah, you know,
Thank you.
I was just using that as an example, you know, of separation. You know, I see where you're coming from, and I agree with you. And at the same time, because it's not either or, and at the same time, it's about, you know, we know that the only way to eliminate prejudice is to have people come together and find their common humanity. So the more a group of people isolates from another group, the less that possibility exists. So I was just using that as an example, that unless we create avenues in which people do connect with one another so that they can learn from one another and understand one another, this will continue. Because we also know that empathy occurs when people are similar to us. So in order to extend empathy, we have to extend who we include within our group. So, and that again, like prejudice, can only happen when we connect with one another and talk with one another and find our common humanity with one another. So that was just an example. I don't want it to deter from the main point.
So I've got to say, Anna, that I actually agree wholeheartedly, and I actually don't think the airport discussion necessarily diverts the discussion, because for example, a recent study showed that the 1% emits more than twice as much CO2 than the bottom 50% of the world, and part of that is in fact because of the way they travel. You know, maybe not the majority of it, but there's an argument to be made that when they're traveling with private jets, as an example, that does create a lot of CO2. And I think your point about them being isolated is also perfectly encapsulated within the Douglas Rushkoff story that I mentioned earlier, that there's at least a section of the billionaire community so certain that the poor people they would rather not associate with are all coming to kill them. And that disconnect and that distance, where I have to as well disagree with Michael. I don't think I'm going to run into a billionaire at the mall. I don't think I'm going to meet up with a billionaire at Walmart waiting to pay for their groceries, because that's not the way they live. And in terms of, Maria, what you said, in terms of people looking at you and saying, oh, you know, you shouldn't have taken a hotel room and such. So I've experienced not quite the same. Like I came from Iceland, where admittedly I guess, you know, the idea of poverty in Iceland versus the idea of poverty in many parts of Africa are definitely very different. But what I felt was when I started working in the UK and started working in a corporate job, you know, it's expected of you to show up in a suit, in a shirt and tie. And very early on, because of my personal style, I started buying primarily very patterned shirts, a lot of floral patterns and everything. But I didn't have a lot of money, so I bought cheap. I bought in like thrift shops. I bought in fast fashion stores like Primark. But you wouldn't believe how many times I got comments like, "Oh, it must be good to afford to buy clothes like yours. It must be good to afford to be able to do this and that." And what I think there, I'm not going to disagree, Maria, in terms of the idea that you do get all sorts of judgment, but I see that as more of a part of something that I mentioned during my towards the end of my section of the panel discussion, which is that we have this tendency to lump everyone with more into the same box. We say, oh, everyone richer than me should contribute, everyone richer than me should do this and that. But that's no different than someone saying everyone with less than me just needs to work harder. But in reality, there is, again, such a huge leap between someone being well off, being financially secure, owning a home, even owning a home, a car, a boat, and a summer house, versus someone being a billionaire with hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of employees in welfare lines because they don't want to pay them more because they want to fly with their private jet. To me, we have to separate those two, because one of them is someone making, yes, more money than many of us will see in our lifetime, but still doing so in a much more ethical way than running modern day wage slavery and sweatshops. But at least that's my opinion. So Anna, I've just got to say 100% with you on what you said. And those were my, well, I was going to say 2 cents, but I'm going to say those were 10 cents. Just going to go with a dime.
What Indy was saying and listening to Michael reminded me of a story. So there was this Buddhist monk who was released from the Chinese gulag after 20-30 years. And when he came to India to meet the Dalai Lama, so the Dalai Lama asked him how was his experience in the gulag. Was it hard and all of that? Thinking that maybe the monk's life was in danger or something. So the monk says, yeah, there were 1 or 2 instances where it was really tough for me. And so the Dalai Lama pushes him to explain it. And he says, yeah, there were 2 times when I almost lost my compassion for my Chinese oppressors. So, so that's the radical compassion that the rest of us will need to envelop the billionaires with. So that's something that comes to me, because I think one of the things the labeling does is it's an us versus them. And then once you do an us versus them, it doesn't change the dynamic. It cannot change. So that makes it hard. Yeah, thanks. Should we call on Andrew and Heinz and Olha? They're silent spectators. Hopefully they're thinking, they're not bots. And Yang Du. Yangbo, are you
yes,
there?
Yep, I'm back now. Yeah, just had a.
Yeah, we were just wondering whether you were a AI bot and you were just observing us.
Oh yeah, system crashed on my desktop, now onto my mobile, so that was why. And it's actually a pretty compelling conversation you had there, because that example of the flight, well, metaphorically, it did relate to some debate amongst a few of my close colleagues. I've had it near the end of 2021. And a lot of that centered on the issue of why are people fixating on billionaires in the first place. So for one it was provoked by a piece that the author wasn't actually advocating any particular policy, but just drawing the illustration that just take that number, that's whatever, 3.5 trillion, 13 trillion, however number required to solve poverty and world hunger, those two. And you note how if you take the collective wealth of billionaires, it is equivalent to those. And what begs the question there is that, well, even if we just take that 13 trillion figure just from the billionaires' worth, it's still only not much more than 3% of all global financial wealth combined. If you add up real estate, the stock markets, all of those, that's in excess of 100 trillion US dollars. So what begs the question is, we have so much more to tap into, say, pensions, savings, like where do we allocate whatever is unspent, all that wealth that's being accumulated, and yet why are we fixating on only that 13 trillion? Why not the remaining 400 some trillion?
I think if I can jump in with a really brief point there, I would even go one step further and say, why does anyone need to pay for the well-being of humanity? Why is there not just a simple line of human rights where we say, look, the inalienable human rights list from the UN includes shelter, food, water, and healthcare. But in reality, all of those things cost money in most places, even though the healthcare bit is definitely cheaper in big parts of Europe, as an example, than America. But I think, I mentioned that I'm not just trying to like big myself up by mentioning my TED Talk again, I promise. But the reason why I do bring that up again is because my whole point in that talk was that we always ask, who's going to pay for this? Who's going to pay for fixing the problem? But if we look at the fact that we're talking about money, which is an idea that we invented, we're talking about supposed hypothetical wealth of a few individuals being able to pay for the welfare of billions of people. Well, why don't we just ensure the welfare of those people? We're in a world suffering with hunger and obesity at the same time. We absolutely can fix this. It's a big ask, and I know to some people it sounds naive or it sounds like science fiction, but in reality, we could. It's just a matter of collective thinking rather than individual thinking.
Yeah, and Ian Bremmer actually has recently, he was just on another podcast lately. It's part of the series Jordan Harbinger Show. If you look that up, he was on the most recent ones. And what he really noted is that what we have right now going for us are a series of crises that, and if you observe history, just how humans have responded to crises, it's really when it gets to a point where there's no choice but to mount a response. Like almost every time it's pulled through. And right now, jury's still out. But from his view, from what he sees, is that at the very least, there is cause for optimism about climate, at the very least, because compared to where the discourse was 20 years ago, it's no longer about things like polar bears and the like. And well, yes, people value them. It's just that they don't register immediately in the minds of most. But when now you get to issues like flooding, droughts, food shortage, all of these concerns, well, that means it's affecting everyone. So it's a lot less easy now. It's a lot less ready now to polarize or otherwise assign some type of like ideological or other form of valence around these issues now compared to what it was 20 or even 10 years ago. Now that it's salient to everyone, and fundamentally though, it's really about the messaging that he explaining how much of the failures around early response to the COVID pandemic, well, a lot of that was an issue of messaging, how inconsistency undermined credibility, whereas now with climate and related risks, from what you're seeing, at the very least, of course, it's far from adequate, but he even cited, even think back to Paris, say 2015, the Paris Agreement, and COP26 Glasgow, even those two, it was already quite an accomplishment to get all UN member states, except for, I think there were only one or two who held out, and the US temporarily out but joined again. But other than that, it's still quite an accomplishment to really get that level of agreement, Spenny. And fundamentally, it's really down to how are you meshing that. Of course, there are other risks like cyber and other emerging threats that are going forward. But basically, that's the overall question. But I do recommend it's worth a listen. So Ian Bremmer, that's Eurasia Group CEO and founder.
A lot of food
John,
for thought.
or yeah, Anna, go ahead, please.
I said there's a lot of food for thought, or a lot of thought for food. So yeah, and you know, just I think I have to go, but one thing is, you know, let's all just, if we can do just one thing, you know, however small or large, to contribute to make this world more equitable, and that includes not only for humans but for the planet Earth. And maybe, you know, again, I think all the answers are in nature, and I think biomimicry might be a good way to check and see what we can learn so that we can change the system, which is in so dire need of change. And that, yes, we're coming to that crisis mode where, you know, change is more probable than not.
Maria, anyone, and